What if I told you that most businesses are burning thousands of dollars every single month because they don't have org charts, they don't have measurable KPIs, they don't even have a standardized hiring process?
A good plumber will generate $250,000 a year in gross profit. If you lose a plumber, it actually takes easily 3 months to get a good replacement trained in a truck, generating revenue again. The cost of it is the opportunity cost of losing $250,000 in gross profit.
Without these three systems, your business is essentially flying blind. Your competitors who are getting this right will leave you behind.
They actually all work together for the same thing, which is clarity and communication. You need to have clarity in where the company is going. Everyone needs to have clarity in what their role is in order to get there, and then they need clarity in how success is measured.
This is part 3 of our Master Prompt series, where we're helping you to build a complete AI operating system for your business. I'm joined by Hayden Miyamoto, CEO of Acquira. Today, we're tackling the people side, which, contrary to popular belief, is just as important in the AI age as it was before. Welcome back to the channel, Hayden. So let's get straight into it. Let's start with just the most basic level. What is a KPI?
A KPI is a key performance indicator. Basically, it marks success for some level of responsibility. To understand this, we have a role. And typically, a lot of people associate a KPI with a role, but that's only part of the truth. In actual fact, roles have responsibilities, right? And so when you're designing a role, you're really designing the responsibilities. It also kind of depends on the size of your company, right? If you have a small company with only a few people, you probably have a role that encompasses many responsibilities, right? So you might have someone who just does marketing, and it's a 4-person company. Marketing entails everything in YouTube. It entails writing newsletters. It entails writing content, publishing it to a blog, even working with designers. And so each of those they're actually processes, but to simplify it, each of those are responsibilities. In this example, we have the role is marketing manager. And the responsibilities, one of them could be send newsletters. So let's use this as an example. Okay. So send newsletters will have associated KPIs.
Just to be clear, most people think, oh, a KPI is a way to measure the success of a person. Mm-hmm. They're thinking of a specific person, but it's really, to be much more specific, it is measuring one responsibility that is under a role that someone occupies, but other people could occupy that same role and have those responsibilities.
Correct. Okay. Yeah. And so what roles typically are? A collection of responsibilities that are industry standard. They really only exist as a way to kind of have shared experiences, to basically say, I've been a marketing manager for 10 years, I was a marketing manager of this company, before that I was a marketing manager of this company, but they could be totally different things that they were responsible for. When we try to hire people, I don't care what their title is, I don't care at all. What I'm looking for is, do you have proven history of succeeding in the processes that these responsibilities represent?
The role's almost like just a label, on a box, but what's in that box is what really matters.
Exactly.
Now that we know a KPI is measuring the success of a responsibility or a process, to be more specific, what makes a good KPI, and maybe also what makes a bad? What do people use instead of KPIs? What's the contrast?
Bad is not having a KPI. That's probably the worst. Another would be not measuring the KPI, so saying this is my KPI, but not actually having targets or not actually measuring the actuals on those targets. And then the third bad would be having the wrong KPI.
Which would be
a KPI that is like a vanity metric, or a KPI that's super lagging, or a KPI that the person actually has no control over. So good, the responsibility needs to actually have control over the KPI. For example, let's say you have the responsibility to write newsletters. You don't have the responsibility to send them. You have a responsibility to write them. A bad KPI for you would be the number of newsletters sent, because you're not in control of sending the newsletter. Likewise, if you were planning YouTube videos, a bad KPI would be the number of YouTube videos published, because you're not in control. The second thing would be, it has to be impactful. It needs to actually impact the process that it's associated with. Send newsletters, basically to probably schedule calls, get sales. So you want this KPI to ideally impact that as much as possible while still being under control. So a vanity number might be, here's how many people received newsletters. We have a list of 100,000. For a branding number, I sent 10 newsletters this month, so 1 million people saw it, right? That's not impactful, right? So what's impactful, one level up might be, okay, how many people opened it? How many people clicked it? How many people went to the schedule call page? How many people scheduled calls? Actually, when you're writing a newsletter and sending it, all of those things are somewhat under your control. Somewhat, not 100% under your control, but somewhat. So at least getting to the point of like clicking the schedule call link in the newsletter is certainly under your control. And so that's a much more impactful KPI.
In other words, it has to be not just a number that you have control over, because there's a lot of numbers you can just game. It's a number you control and can affect, and also one that has a impact, would you say impact on the finances, impact on business goals?
Typically impact on the process above it, right? So which in this case is part of generating customer acquisition, right?
Which is
so generating customers.
Which is the purpose of doing this in the first place.
Exactly.
Okay. Is there a third criteria here?
The third would be that it's a leading indicator, right? And so that kind of goes in with impact, or actually even contrasts it a little bit. A lagging indicator is something that takes a bunch of time to happen. So you have the feedback loop takes a very long time. A leading indicator is sort of the activity at the top. It's a little bit of, you still have control of it, but it still has enough impact, but it's not so far up the funnel that you no longer have control.
We'll give an example of what would not be, like a specific example of something that would not be a leading indicator.
Let's say you had a company that had a pretty high considered purchase cycle, right? So you were selling kitchen cabinetry, and they're like, $100,000 kitchens. You're sending newsletters. If your indicator is number of kitchens sold from email, that's way too much of a lagging indicator.
Happens
right?
way late.
Yeah, it happens months later because the consider purchase here is a long cycle. Yeah. It might be fine if what you're doing is you're selling a $2 widget because the consider purchase is immediate. And so that is where the exact same thing could be a leading indicator or a lagging indicator depending on the type of business.
So in that example of the the kitchens, what would be a leading indicator for a purchase like that?
So typically it would be booking a call with a design consultant. It could be replying to the email. It's usually some kind of action that begins a conversation with anything that's a considered purchase.
KPIs are a pretty old idea. It's been around for a while. How do AIs change them or make it easier to track them or anything like that?
First of all, I would say that AI is very much changing roles.
How so?
So when we said roles are a collection of responsibilities, a lot of those responsibilities can be augmented by AI, so they're extending the range of the sort of target KPI. And then a lot of things are being automated entirely. Let's say the send newsletter, it's a good example because create and send a newsletter is really what it should say. A create and send newsletter pre-AI, if you did that full time, you could probably do a few a day, right? If there was really good content. Post-AI, especially with the master prompt, you could probably, if you really wanted to, you could probably do 300 a day. And then if you were to start introducing automation, right, make it like an N8N workflow, tie it into Kit or ActiveCampaign or whatever, you could actually probably do like 30,000 a day.
Yeah.
That will shift. And what we're going to see is like roles will have a bunch of these AI responsibilities shifting out of them and then opening up new responsibilities that are much higher leverage and take advantage of what humans are good at and AI is not good at.
Interesting. So it's like changing the very kind of the foundation of what these words even mean or what's contained within them.
Yeah.
Let's head to the computer and take a look at how AI can help us with some of this.
Let's do it.
All right, here we are again. So which LLM are you going to be using here?
I'm using Claude.
And this has your master prompt.
This has my master prompt for two of my companies, Acquira and Empower, which are both quite related.
What's a basic example of how AI can help you utilize KPIs?
I want to hire a YouTube editor. We don't actually do YouTube, so that'd be good. A YouTube editor for Acquira. This role would cover everything involved with YouTube since we aren't currently doing it. Help me design the KPIs. I'll just leave it there. My master prompt has taught Claude to always ask me clarifying questions and to answer its own question based on what it knows about my business before continuing. I like that to understand, first of all, any deficiencies the master prompt might have, and I also just want to see its thinking.
So where it says my assumption, that's
what it's assuming.
Thinking. Okay.
And so it's answering its own question, basically, based on what it assumes about us. So current YouTube state and goals. We're targeting acquisition entrepreneurs with educational content to drive accelerated sales. However, what's the current state of your YouTube channel? Do you have existing video subscribers or is this a fresh start? What's your primary goal? Lead generation for the accelerator, brand building, or both? It says you want YouTube as a lead generation engine feeding into your email list, ultimately driving accelerator sales. That's accurate. How frequently do you envision publishing? 2 to 3 long form videos per week. Oof. So I would probably correct that. It's asking how much do I want to pay? I care most about business impact, email list growth, qualified leads, and ultimately accelerator sales. Yes. I want to see engagement optimization improvements within 30 days, subscriber growth within 90 days, and measurable lead generation within 6 months. Yeah, that's pretty good. So the only thing I would actually do here is say content value implies lower quality. I'd want higher quality content, maybe 3 long form pieces per month. It's asking about what kind of content I want. That's accurate. Am I expecting to own the complete strategy from content planning and SEO research to thumbnail design, community management, and analytics? Yes, yes.
If you were to sit here and give all this context that it would need to create this, how long would that have taken?
Just answering these questions would have taken me about 5 minutes to 10 minutes per question. And there were like 5 questions here and then 5 questions here. So that would have been, probably an hour and a half.
Was almost all correct except just 1 or 2 things you had to adjust.
So I adjusted it and then it kind of pointed out, hey, by adjusting this, my success timeline extends. Is that okay? And so that actually makes me think, well, would I want to possibly have slightly lower quality and more volume? Because everything I know about YouTube says I probably have to publish 100 videos and get lucky once before I get decent traction.
When you ask for a correction, it makes the correction, but then it looks at second, third order consequences.
Yep. Technically, what I asked for was KPIs for this new role. But what it's actually giving me is it's actually helping me understand the total investment into a new customer acquisition channel, which is kind of the root. Obviously this was more for demonstration, but actually I am genuinely interested in setting up a YouTube channel. I just don't really want to do it myself. It's interesting that it kind of got there on its own.
So with that one word, yes, you're essentially confirming approving all of its thinking.
Yep.
And now it's getting back to the original request.
Well, it's actually gone out and just made me a job description. This is partially because I have in my master prompt to create these things.
Okay, so what has it come up with here?
So it was over eager and it actually started going through my whole hiring SOP. But part of it is obviously the metrics, and so it's done it right here. And so we can take a look at that. Responsibilities, like I said, responsibilities, metrics to measure, and here it's at a quarterly target. Content strategy and planning, the metric is videos published on schedule. Quarterly target is 9 high-quality videos per quarter. We already told it that. The responsibility of video production and editing, the average video completion rate, 45% completion rate. I'm not really sure what that benchmark is because I don't understand this area.
Is it saying time to completion? Average, because you're going to finish all videos like one way or another. You're not going to throw any away.
Yeah, so we can ask it what it means by that. That's something I would probably do. Search ranking improvement, that's interesting. Click-through rates. So it's saying 8% average CTR, YouTube benchmarks 4 to 6%. That's aggressive then. Qualified leads from YouTube. This to me is probably my most important. 75 plus email times per month from YouTube traffic. So that sucks, but I also understand that's probably fairly accurate if I were starting a new channel from scratch. So this ultimately would probably be my most important long term, but in the short term, I'd probably actually care more about this.
Okay.
Yeah, publishing. Yeah, so based on this, I would go back and forth with it a little bit, right? So right here, for example, I could select this. If it wasn't creating the other artifacts, I can go to improve and ask about it.
Do these metrics fit those criteria, being controllable, leading, impactful?
Yep. So let's look at them. But like video published on schedule, that's definitely controllable. It's definitely impactful, and it's leading. So it's got all 3. Again, I don't fully understand what it means by this, so I'll skip it until I get to ask it. This is an interesting one. I wasn't really thinking about it, but like video SEO is a thing. Click-through rate, I'd say it's very controllable. It's very leading. It's very impactful. Obviously, this is great.
You can find that complete AI hiring SOP at the QR code right here or at the link in the description below. Even if you're not in a position to be hiring right now or have no plans to ever hire, you can think of this SOP as a kind of model or template for how to build almost like a little mini program into your master prompt for anything, any repeatable process in your business or in your job, so that anytime you want to run that process, you can just refer to that SOP and it will call it up instantly. So let's leave that there for a minute. We're going to come back to everything going on over here on the left.
Yeah.
We'll let it finish its work first. Let's head back to the whiteboard and talk about org charts.
Sounds good.
Okay. All right. So what are org charts even, and why do they matter, and how would you make an org chart?
So org chart is an organizational chart. They're used to visualize the organization. There are a few different ways to go about it. The most common is just the hierarchy, right, which is kind of the power and control style. And basically you have roles reporting up to other roles. You'll have typically, say we have a CEO at the top, and then you would have functional departments, where each would have, let's say, maybe let's call it a VP layer. Underneath those, you'd have a management layer. And then here we have individual contributors. So let's say this is operations, customer acquisition. One good thing to visualize in an org chart is organizational efficiency. Pre-AI, you didn't want to have more than about max 10 people reporting to a single manager. It's too much work for the manager. You also didn't want to have, let's say, under 5 people reporting to a manager, because then it's inefficient and it's expensive. But you also, a lot of the time, don't want to have, whenever possible, a manager dueling as an individual contributor, especially in a role like sales, where you have, basically, it's kind of schizophrenic, because a salesperson needs to be a killer, and they're a taker, right? And the sales manager needs to be a giver. So it's kind of like half the day you need to put on a totally different and contrasting hat. It's a reporting structure. This person wants to have ideally only one boss. And what that means is this person has the ability to hire these people and has the ability to fire these people. It's all about power, right? That's the hierarchical org chart. The benefit of it is it's simple. It also communicates a clear career progression path. You can go from here to here to here to here. The negative is it's role-based. Right? We just talked about the differences between responsibilities and roles.
Right.
And the overall power structure of it can mean more politics, more that was marketing's job, that was this person, more blame. And also often if communication happens from this person to this person to this person to this person and then back down one at a time, like in the army, right? Like you don't skip chain of command,
right.
Then your feedback loop is incredibly slow. So this is why corporations are so slow moving, is because communication is so slow in these companies that the feedback loop takes forever. Overall, this can be a good structure, in my opinion, for a smallish company, but it's probably not a good structure for a very small company.
Especially with the influence of AI, what do you think this traditional structure is moving to? What does it look like in an AI world?
Instead of roles, you have processes, and you have people accountable for many processes. And then you have various AI agents and humans involved in basically the responsibility to do or to be consulted in those processes. I still think that there is a functional layer of command, like who hires, who fires, but I don't look at it as roles.
I think some people are thinking like, oh, there will still be these boxes in this hierarchy, and AI will come in and just say, oh, now AI is in this job, in this role, rather than a person. What I take from what you're saying is it's not really that simple. There's an inversion of thinking process first instead of role first that needs to happen. And then underneath those processes, there could be a mix of AI agents and humans that support the process. What are some other implications of making that inversion, or just some other implications of thinking process first?
So, I mean, the implication of the inversion or of the AI entering is significantly more profitability per employee, because the AI is doing a bunch of their work for them, doing a bunch of the responsibilities. Naturally, what that means is smaller companies can do more. I don't think a ton of people will be fired over it. I mean, a ton of people will be, but I don't think that's as big of a worry of just people aren't going to be hired anymore, because we just can do more with less. And that's what organizations are going to focus on.
So the organizations are going to keep growing, but they're going to grow on the backs of AI rather than growing through hiring.
And the big challenge will be adoption of AI, but also how do roles adapt and change quickly with those feedback loops so that people aren't just like sitting around, scrolling Instagram all day.
Are there any other ways that AI is going to change the org structure, the org chart, before we move over to the computer and look at some examples?
I think AI is actually really well positioned to be a manager, especially a director and even a CEO.
Really? Why is that?
It has full context if given the context, it has full context, makes decisions, I would say, quite well. A lot of those jobs are the things that AI can leverage heavily. Massive amounts of content to consume, right? I can consume and watch 100 sales people's calls in 2 minutes and report on it all. Managers will be enabled by AI, but when we said that this might be 7 to 10 people, I think it might be things like call reviews instead of being a weekly call that you have with people on a cadence. It ends up being the AI reviews them all automatically, flags ones that are really poor performing to the manager immediately. The manager looks at it and then has a call review. Otherwise, if people are doing well, like you don't really need to do call reviews, right? Or you can just have it audited really infrequently.
What you're describing is sort of like exception handling.
Yep.
So instead of putting everyone through this kind of slow-moving gear that everyone is on the same pace, you're letting people move essentially as fast as they can with AI, and then only picking them out of that or giving them more attention or feedback if they really need it by exception.
So one possible, probable negative consequence of that is a less human connection at work. Right now, it's quite standard to have a one-on-one call, right? And your one-on-one call is often really personal, and that's how you get to know each other, and that's how you build relationships. But if this person is handling 50 people instead of 7, because a bunch of their responsibilities, like one-on-ones, are no longer necessary, what does that mean? How does a smart organization solve for that vacuum? Because there probably are one-to-many ways to solve for it instead of the one-to-one we're doing.
Or like peer-to-peer or something? Or even across different functions or even different companies?
Like the Slack donut thing.
Shall we head to the computer and look at some examples?
Let's do it.
We just explored some of the ins and outs of org charts. How would you say that AI can help us in our thinking around org charts?
I think the easiest is it can make the org chart for you. The old way of doing it was that you'd sit down on a whiteboard and you'd write it all out and you'd figure out
Post-its.
Yeah, Post-its, and then you put it into, Miro or some visual diagram. And that was like, that was a leadership team full day session, right? You go have some beer and feel good about your work.
Yeah.
Now you just ask Claude to do it based on the master prompt.
Let's see it.
So make me a visual diagram of Acquira's org chart based on what you know. Do this in HTML in a separate artifact. Don't include any financial information. Each role should have a primary KPI shown in their respective box. So it's drafting the artifact in HTML. When it's done, it has a preview box. Probably take about a minute. All right, so it just finished. So it's got me as the executive. It's got a customer acquisition team with Josh as the director. It shows our primary KPI, so mine is company revenue growth. This is monthly sales targets. This is accurate. Team close rate, set to demo rate, number of sets. Then this is all accurate. Cost per scheduled call, yep.
You had in your master prompt kind of a written org chart, right? Like you described the different roles and who holds them.
Yep.
What is the advantage of, this is just basically visualized it. Is there value just in visualizing it?
There's value in communicating it to the team. Humans are very poor at visualizing data without an aid. And so this is that aid. So to even know, like, these are all the people on my team, right? Or to know that these are all the people on this other team, it actually does help understand, like, who else is working in the company and what do they do. This is a pretty small company, but I mean, it's a decent org chart. You could do all sorts of things from here. You could turn this into a little clickable app that goes to people's job descriptions with a couple prompts.
You can put it on your website.
You could put it on your website. You could turn it into a mermaid diagram and like import it into an actual flowchart tool so that you could actually edit it yourself.
Shall we head back to the whiteboard and talk about our first SOP that we're going to create?
Yeah, the hiring SOP, let's do it.
Okay. All right, so our third people-related topic. Let's start with this. Why is it even important to hire in a systematic way?
The cliche to fire fast and hire slow, I truly, truly believe in. It's kind of sad that we all kind of just assume that half of our hires won't work out. And I think people don't realize the cost of churn, of employee. It's massive. One employee churning, you lose all of the opportunity cost. You lose all of the institutional knowledge that they gained. If you actually compound, I think we talked about this last time, like compare the trajectories of two companies where one company has half the employee churn of the other, it's incredible after like 10, 20 years what kind of difference that makes. So I think that is probably the most underrated problem.
It's hard to even calculate, isn't it? It's hard to even put a number on it.
Well, I mean, you can, I do, right? So like we have a bunch of sort of brick and mortar businesses, and they're very people-centric, and they will continue. They will not be replaced by AI anytime soon, because they're literally people who come to your house and do work on your home. And so you get one plumber, a good plumber will generate $500,000 a year in revenue, and $250,000 a year in gross profit. If you lose a plumber, the replacement, because it's such a hard role to hire for, it actually takes probably easily 3 months, more likely 6 months to get a good replacement trained in a truck generating revenue again. And so really the cost of that is not the cost of paying on Indeed to find a hire and paying your HR person. No, the cost of it is the opportunity cost of losing $250,000 in gross profit, which is $250,000 to your bottom line, which could be existential.
Just based on that one person.
Yeah.
How does hiring in a consistent or systematic way address any of that?
First of all, you have a much faster feedback loop towards finding someone who's not the right fit. Typically, you'll probably be firing more people, but you'll be firing them very fast. And then secondly, because you have a more rigorous interview process, the likelihood of someone starting who is not a good fit is much lower.
You're more quickly realizing who's not a good fit. In a way, therefore, you're going to arrive faster at finding the person who is a good fit.
Yeah, and with better systems and better communication, you are setting the expectations for the role very, very clearly. You say, this is what, Tiago, you're coming to work for me. This is what success looks like. In 30 days, 60 days, 90 days, we're going to review this. And so you know whether you're winning or losing as you go along. Putting that work in up front means that you're more likely to succeed.
So it's of service to the potential employee as well.
Of course, yeah.
What do you say to the objection if someone says, well, what's most important is culture fit and sort of my gut instinct and my connection that I feel to that person?
I would say that opens up a lot of bias to hiring. It opens up homogenous culture. And it's qualitative, it's not quantitative, so it's very difficult to, even if you're really good at it, it's very difficult to get you out of that and get someone else in there who's good at it. How do you teach that? So that's in terms of going on my gut. Yeah. Now, which is different than going on core values, right, and culture. So that core values is actually a systematic way to approach culture. To say our core values are being systematic, right? Our core values are being authentic, being generous. Right? You can actually interview based on that. You can actually ask questions based on that. Our core values to be humble, to be collaborative. You want to find someone collaborative? Ask them about past experiences and wins that they had and see how many times they say I instead of we. To me, core values, it's a system to test for culture. And I actually think hiring on core values is like one of those things everybody says, but I think what you're doing is you're hiring on the hardest attribute to train. If I am hiring someone who has a fairly easy to learn job. So say it's a data entry job. I would rather hire on culture because it's much easier for me to teach someone data entry than to teach them how to be generous, right? Or collaborative. Right. But then let's say I'm hiring someone for a really specific, needs to have worked in a very specific banking role, plus needs to have this experience doing an M&A role. There might be 15,000 people in the US, and I need to hire someone in the US. It'd probably be easier to teach them how to be more collaborative and deal with that.
Interesting. Right. That's a great principle. So hire for what is most difficult to train in them.
Now, there are certain things that I would say are anti-values. If someone is dishonest or anything like that you don't do. So you need to identify what those things are. And I think having a good hiring system is good for identifying that.
So we're going to look at some examples of that in a minute. But I think you said before that hiring should be your first SOP. Is that right?
Not necessarily it's your first SOP, but it's one of the functions in a master prompt that is super, super impressive in what it can do for you, right? And so it can make these really, really thorough systems with very little input on your end. When you're doing this AISP or when you're doing the hiring, right? First of all, obviously you want a job description. And that job description, like we talked about, it is a description of the role. And then it contains all of the responsibilities and KPIs, associated KPIs. So that's in the job description. In addition, what I like to ask for now, because AI can do the work for us, is to say, what does a player behavior look like? So these KPIs, by the way, will have targets. So if I'm hiring you to write content is your responsibility. KPI is how success is measured. And so we're going to go, let's say, that we publish 20 articles a week. That's the target. So number of articles a week, target. So a player behavior is more about the behaviors that you show outside of just these responsibilities and KPIs, right? So being systematic, improving processes.
And why are they important if they're not part of this flow? Like, why even bother with them?
Because you want to have high standards. Basically, what we do is we call it sort of B player, A player. So A player behavior are like people that you're most likely going to be promoting quite quickly.
Yeah.
And our rule is if someone is a B player, you coach them to an A player. And if someone's a C player, you fire them as part of the initial hiring process. Okay. Right?
Oh, so you can tell which one they fit into even during the hiring process?
More in like the onboarding process. Okay. Right? So this is number one. So, and again, the AI SCP will do all of this for you and say, what are all the responsibilities, KPIs, and targets? What are the A player behaviors? What are the B player behaviors, right?
Say a bit about what would that take in terms of time or resources pre-AI?
So, we were doing this pre-AI. We had an HR person, or we call them people and culture person, would create them and would have to interview the direct supervisors to figure out what were the responsibilities, KPIs, and targets. And there's a big feedback loop there because they're busy doing other stuff. Right. It might have only taken the direct supervisor, a 2-hour meeting to figure it all out, and taken the HR person, let's call it a week, right? Preparing everything, having that meeting, going back and forth. But because you have all these players involved, right, and you have these feedback loops, it might take a month. Right?
To have all those meetings.
To have all those meetings and finally be like, so from the moment of Tiago saying, we have this hiring need, to the moment of, okay, all of this is ready to systematically hire, right? It might take a month. And so that's why companies have such terrible hiring practices, is because in order for you to hire quickly, which you need to do, you need to hire quickly, you actually can't do any of this stuff. So you end up just taking a warm body.
Right. You just ask, I think you've mentioned like, oh, who can use a computer?
Yeah.
Okay, you're hired.
Exactly.
So is that another benefit of systematic hiring is you would assume systematic hiring takes longer, but you're kind of implying that it can be done faster.
With AI, it can be done fast. If you're making this hiring process, you're just dealing with Claude. Claude knows the responsibilities, KPIs, and targets. And so this is an area where it's more likely that you don't need even the HR person to have this responsibility. It's now probably part of your responsibility, and it makes more sense for that to happen because you don't need the extra feedback loop. Because if you give this to your HR person and they give it to Claude, they still have to come back to you to review it, or the supervisor.
So you're tightening and shortening the feedback loop, which then lets you remove people from it, which then makes it even tighter.
Yep.
It's like just getting smaller and smaller.
Yeah, and this is where you end up having 3-person organizations, right? Because so much of that institutional knowledge lies in those 3 people, and they can just make decisions, have AI do all the work. So that's number one. And we'll go over this in all the different artifacts that it can create. When you hire, you have a job description, you need to actually create the offer, the supporting materials, we'll call it. So that might be the actual job offer, it might be the job posting for external sites. It might mean the job posting internally, right? If you have an employee referral program, which everybody should have, that's your number one thing.
Really?
Oh yeah. Or an email to your list if you have a big list. Yeah. Hiring is a lot like employee acquisition is exactly the same as customer acquisition.
Totally.
It's exactly the same. And just like you have a cost of acquisition for a customer, you should have a cost of talent acquisition. Supporting materials is a bunch of different things. Again, all of those things would take an HR person maybe an additional week, a few days to get done. Then you have screening for interviews. So if you do email your list, if you do post your job, you are likely going to get hundreds of applicants. The screening side, AI can also do for you. In fact, what we do in our SOP is to create a screening rubric and to have the application, it knows what's in the rubric and to write the cover letter based on what's in the rubric so that AI can automatically tell you if someone passes.
You're just passing them through that filter.
Yeah.
Wow.
And it tells you, it makes the suggestion on what should be there. Almost always better than what I would do.
And less biased.
Yeah, there's probably
Other biases.
well, there's probably a nice industry in like how do you get past AI screening filters.
Right, keywords, lots of keywords.
4 is interviews. I call them working interviews. So part of a systematic hiring process is having interviews, typically multiple interviews. This is a human-centric thing. However, what they do in that interview, if you're testing for a skill, AI is incredibly good at doing that, like way better than I am. And then also I always give homework for any manager role or above, usually like a 2 to 3 hour project. AI is incredibly good at designing homework. And then finally, we have onboarding. What we do, and we've always done in our companies, is we have a pretty heavy onboarding process. So just like you have a customer journey, we have an employee journey. In our companies, we want the metric for our onboarding process is actually number of referred employees for employee referrals at the end of the process, because we want the onboarding to be so strong that they refer people from their old job.
Interesting.
It's more in like our brick and mortar companies, where people is a real challenge. What we actually have AI do is create an entire onboarding customized to that position. You can give it a lot of, like, there's a great book by Joy Coleman, Never Lose an Employee Again. How do you surprise and delight? Create multiple touch points from multiple people, do send gifts and videos, take them out to lunch. You can customize that for that role. And again, AI knows who the people are and how to do it. And all this you can write by just saying one sentence, which we'll look at.
So these are the 5 key parts of what you would describe as a systematic hiring process.
Yeah.
Okay, shall we go take a look at it?
Let's do it.
Okay. So we've kind of built up a couple layers of foundational knowledge, and I kind of feel like this SOP, the standard operating procedure that we're going to create, is kind of like the pinnacle, the cherry on top of everything we've covered. And we're going to focus on hiring, I believe. We kind of started off already running your hiring SOP, but so why don't you explain, like, how did this all happen? Where did these different documents come from?
So I have like a protocol, it's a prompt called AI hiring. And normally I would just say, I could, for example, do another one right here and say, do AI hiring for name a role.
Like a sales manager.
Okay. So same thing it normally does, is ask me 5 questions, ask me to confirm based on its understanding. So we actually do have a sales manager.
And it's already just following the steps of the protocol, the SOP that you have in your master prompt.
Yeah, which is always ask questions first,
Okay.
clarifying questions. So again, it knows who the people are already, who they're managing, who the SDRs are, it knows what my targets are.
But the exact questions are not predetermined. It's coming up with the questions.
Oh yeah, no, it's coming up with them.
Okay.
To make, it knows what it needs to make, and so it needs to know what to put in, right?
Okay.
So based on this, it's understanding what will the job description include, right? What are the KPIs, et cetera. So what level sales leadership experience and background should this person have? So it says 3 to 5 years of sales management experience, ideally managing 3 to 8 sales professionals, background high-ticket B2B sales, experience with coaching sales teams to improve conversion rates, previous experience, track record hitting aggressive growth targets. Yeah, so I'm going to add to this. I would want them to have a broad network potential salespeople to hire, otherwise accurate. So one of the things that we put in our master prompt is, what is your sort of pay band philosophy in the company? So our pay band philosophy is to be top 50th percentile by base, but top 80th percentile by OTE.
OTE is
on target expectation, on target earnings.
like basically bonuses?
Bonuses, yeah. And to tie all, like, so that's a large part of their earnings will then come from bonuses, which are tied to the KPIs.
Okay.
In this case, it knows that already, and so it's kind of coming up with a compensation structure. Sometimes I'll use deep research to actually find compensation structures for a market. And it's actually given like what the team performance bonus would be for each thing, $2,000 successful sales hire. So it knew that based on what I said before about wanting a network of salespeople to draw on. Yeah, it knows what my targets are. Yeah, it's great.
Yeah.
Yeah. Feels so dismissive. I think it's such a long response.
I know.
Yeah, that's accurate. That's pretty aggressive. That's accurate.
This is all still just the information collection stage. It's just trying to gather details.
Yeah, and it's interesting to see how it's doing it too. So yeah, the only thing I'd say is there's no show rate based on what I know about the business. That's unrealistic. maybe below 40%. So it's saying A player consistently exceeds team targets as opposed to meets, which is interesting. Not sure if that's necessary. These three are good though. So I would probably say here, A players just need to consistently meet targets. No-show rates over 40% are acceptable.
You mean under 40%?
Well, that's what I meant.
It probably understood.
How should this role integrate with the correct team structure? Yep. Okay, so that's how this normally works.
So these are the 5 parts or components of a systematic hiring process that we were looking at previously.
Yep. Yeah, so we have the job description here. They're all in separate artifacts. I've got it set to give monthly outcomes for month 1 and month 2, month 3, because that's part of the top grading process in which we're really reviewing and making very clear expectations. I've got the A player versus B player performance. I got the ideal background, required experience, preferred experience, comp structure, bonus payment structure, success metric integration, core value integration, right? So it knows my core values. It says creating repeatable systems for content production, optimization, lead generation, ensuring content provides genuine value to viewers while effectively generating qualified leads. So this is the screening and application. And so it's given a whole rubric on technical competency and business acumen and cultural fit. I didn't ask it to do this, it chose that. And basically that equals, I guess, 100 points total. And so the minimum passing score is 70 to 100. And a strong candidate is 85 to 100. So basically don't have second interviews or don't have screening interviews with people under 7. And if we get a lot of people, we might not go under 85.
Interesting.
This would be the email to our list, job board posting. So this is important, the cover letter requirements. This is important because this is how it actually scores those 4 things: the technical competence, the business, blah, 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 industry understanding, right? And so if someone doesn't do the cover letter, they don't get an interview.
Right.
If someone doesn't do the cover letter and cover all these things, they're not going to be well scored.
Interesting.
But if they cover all these things, and we can also have it analyze the resumes for it. This is the working interview process. So in this position, I probably would have a working interview. And so it's saying like a 2-hour working interview and saying it should be Josh Harris and the candidate in a screen share collaborative working session, and then gives them basically live challenges.
All customized to this role.
Yeah.
What's amazing too is like you might find something and learn something and be like, oh, I actually want to adjust this. And it could just update that artifact and all the others as well. It's like holistic, all-encompassing changes.
Yes, this is an interesting one, like asking someone to do competitive positioning. We're entering a crowded space with channels like Bigger Pockets, Grant Cardone, and various business acquisition educators. How do we differentiate? Do a competitive analysis, do a positioning strategy, do live.
Super interesting.
That's way better than what I would do.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
And you get to watch how they think. And then homework assignments, complete video strategy, lead generation funnel, channel launch strategy. This is how we should be evaluating during the working interview, what it suggests. So it's actually suggesting 40, 30, 20, 10. I might do a little less on business acumen, a little bit more on cultural fit. And those are things I can say improve and change. This is the scoring framework, post-interview process. It even sets up the meeting structures and responsibilities. So who do they have meetings with? What do those meetings look like?
It's going beyond hiring to even, it's almost planning the person's work for them.
Yeah. The private version of this actually has it create an entire Notion template for the role.
No way. Incredible.
So, and it puts everything together.
And what's the last one here?
This is the statement of work. So if this were an independent contractor, then this is what we'd append to the IC agreement. So again, we don't have to do this.
It could even write the contract, or is this a contract?
So this is an amendment or an appendix to an existing contract that we actually had a legal create, but this is like, what are the deliverables on the service side? What are the performance standards, work schedule and availability, right? So we don't have to write this. This would have taken someone like 3 days. I mean, with other stuff they're doing. Yeah. And I would have had to go and review it, and it would not be nearly as good as this.
Oh yeah, or thorough or as comprehensive. How many people have you hired using this?
Yeah, probably like over a dozen.
And
maybe
have you
20?
Around 20?
Yeah.
Since you started using this?
Yeah.
How have you noticed it go differently, the hiring process go differently because you're using this more thorough process?
Yeah. We end up over-indexing. So we end up having a lot more. So the one piece that's not on this one is the onboarding, because it's on the other side of it, on the Notion template. But we end up, out of the 20 people, or 20-ish people, I'd say probably half didn't get through the full onboarding because it's a lot, right? And to get through the whole process. But it's great to screen that half out now and not have to screen them out 6 months later and fire them.
So you made an offer, they accepted, and then during the onboarding, half dropped out.
Or during the screening process, they didn't do the homework, and so we didn't hire them. Or they failed the working interview, which I never would have done before, and so we didn't hire them. Or even the expectations that we were giving them up front on like what month 1, what month 2, what month 3 looks like were way too much for them, and it scared them off, which I'm grateful for, because we have a pretty big culture of accountability and challenging, and I want someone who thrives on that.
Interesting. How would you say this applies to teams of different sizes? Is there a range of headcount that this makes sense for, or is it really any size organization?
Honestly, I think it's any size organization. Like when you look at the amount of work this takes, it's enough work to read, and then I'm going to probably copy and paste this and put this into different places. The only thing I'd say is like certain positions, this may be like super excessive for. So if you have a very, very, very junior position, this could be overkill. AI tends to over-deliver, be over-eager. And so I always say, is this overly complex or over-engineered for a company of my size or for this position? And then it'll be like, absolutely 100%. And then it'll cut it down. So that's like a nice little hack.
So we've covered these sort of 3 related people-oriented systems, org charts, KPIs, and a process for hiring. What do you see as the compound effect of implementing 3 systems like this in a business? Like, how do they work together to change a business?
They actually all work together for the same thing, which is clarity and communication. I always say you need to have clarity in where the company is going. Everyone needs to have clarity in what their role is in order to get there. And then they need clarity in how success is measured in that role. All 3 of those things work together to give clarity to the entire team. Not just about their role, but about everybody's roles. And actually one thing that we do is this is open to everybody. So you can actually see every single person's, we call them clarity boards.
That's just for transparency or accountability or?
Both.
Yeah, it's so funny because thinking of my very small team of 5 people, I can remember many situations where I just sort of assume like, oh, everyone knows everything. Like we all just hang out together and we talk all the time. Everything must be clear, but that's not at all the case. Because then I run into a whole series of situations where people go like, they don't know the most basic facts about the business or about each other's roles or about how other parts of the business work.
Yeah, and both of us have fully remote companies, right? So it's not like you hang out by the water cooler every day. I'm not actually a huge believer in org charts, but I do an org chart every month, and I share it in our town hall. We have a town hall, which is basically a meeting, 30 minutes to an hour with everyone in the company. Try to let the leadership team run it so that they develop themselves leaders. But that's one piece I find really interesting is like people are fascinated by the org chart to understand like who does, like what does that person do, right? And they can go down that rabbit hole if they want.
It kind of facilitates and encourages them to learn from each other, I feel like. Because it's like, oh, this is all transparent. You're allowed to know. It's not some like secret thing. If you've watched this far, I have a special gift for you. We are actually going to share in the description below the complete SOP for AI first hiring that Hayden actually uses in his companies today. You can check that out in the description below. Also, if you want to go much, much deeper into this and learn from us personally how to implement this in your organization, I really encourage you to sign up for the waitlist for Second Brain Enterprise, our in-depth immersive program on AI first business. Thanks for joining me once again on the channel, Hayden, and for sharing all your knowledge.
Yeah, awesome being here.
I hope you enjoyed and more importantly got value from that deep dive into how AI can really improve and honestly transform the role of people, of human beings inside companies. And if you decide to implement and you go ahead and do implement anything that you heard about or saw in this video, I would really appreciate it if you let us know in the comments below.